Hey, Mark. All right.
Good, how about you? So you said as long as an agent is a member of any board, then they're fine, right? Because like Buckthorn, I mentioned that he was a member at OCAR.
Correct, as long as it's a member of CRMLS.
Got it. How do you? Well, like for example, when I do a search under agent roster,
But likely, if you're finding them there, they're a member of CRMLS.
they're not there.
They're not.
They're when I go over to like do a search for any listing that they might have had
Mhm.
or represented a buyer, they're there, but it's not with OCAR.
No, but Sarah MLS, if you look on the roster, it doesn't necessarily tell you which is Elkhart. Their ID will indicate which board they're a member of. But if they're not a member of Sierra MLS, Sierra MLS is obviously very broad. There are other MLSs, like you've dealt with the one in Northern California or something like that.
Right.
So
So then if they don't appear under the agent roster anywhere,
they're not a member of Sierra MLS.
that's okay, so that's
Yeah.
the case with this guy.
Yeah.
Because when I go, like, for example, you can do a search under, I think it's called residential detail,
Mhm.
go down and type in their name under any, under the listing agent field, his name pops up twice.
So I can't remember what the basis of the discussion is, why this is.
Well, I just, I want to let them know, hey, so I can plant the seed when they sign up here, hey, you need to join the board.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking about a transaction for some reason, but it's about somebody who is you're going to talk to.
No, well, like this guy, he's one of our agents, but going forward, I want to know if I should plant the seed for them to join the MLS and
Yes, they should. Otherwise, they're just going to be simply a referral agent. They're entitled to nothing except giving somebody a name.
so, for example, Boston, under agent roster,
Mhm.
he's not there.
He's not there.
But under residential detail listing side,
Mhm.
his name is there twice with 2 IDs.
So associated with which
I can't tell.
MLS?
I can't tell. I don't know.
So it shows that he had transactions in the past. Is that what you're suggesting?
Maybe that's what it is, or maybe he currently still is.
Yeah, if he's not a member, it's like he won't show up on the roster. Obviously, his name would still show up under, you would think, the activity
Fair enough.
for a transaction.
I'm just trying to figure out how it works. By the way, Yancey, he's in escrow as a buyer's agent. So,
Oh, really? And who's the buyer? Him?
No. No, I have to double check that. I don't think it is though, because
Did he move already to not Robinson Ranch, but Deb Canaan? Because that's where he was moving to.
no, he had actually previously bought a house before.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see.
So he's already there.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this is a new
Wow.
transaction.
Something I just didn't expect.
We were not that guy's actually. I asked him, I said,
Mm-hmm. Fair question, yeah.
because I mean, like, what do you mean? I was like, well, because your career was as a sheriff,
Mhm.
sheriff's department, and you're living in a $3 million house. I mean, what's going on? He's like, no, what I did is, I guess he's done several real estate transactions ever since he started. So he's bought and sold like 26 properties.
Oh, wow.
He's like, I just worked my way up.
Wow, good for him.
So I mean,
I guess I underestimated him.
Yeah, well, you don't end up living in Kodo. I mean,
Yeah.
in a box of rocks.
No, typically not,
That's why
right?
I asked. I was
Yeah.
like, hey, how'd you do this?
Uh-huh.
Pretty impressive.
Huh, it is. I think so too.
Yeah, so he's got something. Cool.
Yeah. So for the property tax bill,
Sure.
I make offenders, treasurer, tax collector, just so we should already know. Yeah, okay. This is from Jim's section. Oh. So full name. Check.
Fucking stupid. Sure.
Go big. Yeah, first and second. I'm not fun. Spicy. Got a Hall of Fame kicker you can throw in there. Oh, I should float the dot. I'm halfway serious about talking with the dots, like the dots Jefferson stack rest of the time. I don't know. Why did you put that in? I'll tell you about the game. That would have been a lot better. I really want to. No, same here. Yeah, because that week, like, I'm randomly in it still, like, after you posted that, and look, like, I'm actually 50 points above them. Yeah, so if it became a tiebreaker between me and I think we could have yeah, I think you're right, yeah. But I just think that I was closer than that. You put it in that big game. That big game. Yeah, I got paid there.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's about points. Christian Watson for the education. He was walking around, he's fine. I don't know if you watched the game. Christian Watson, Christian Justice Watson, future Hall of Famer.
consideration. And what I tell everybody is that you can never guarantee a buyer that they are going to get their money back. It's likely that they
You have to
will.
tell them.
I would tell them because they always are wondering if I
Scare
cancel.
them.
They're entering into a contract, right?
You want to make sure you buy, sir, right?
Yeah, right. You don't you just can't cancel because you just want to cancel. You better have a good faith reason, something that's defensible if you're going to cancel the transaction. And there's two reasons, obviously. We don't want to jeopardize their deposit, but the other side is we want them to go forward with the transaction, understand that they've entered into a contract and they just can't rescind it at any time.
Yes, sir.
Guys,
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's fine. I'll get that out of your way.
I want to sit next to two people.
Sit next to three handsome guys. Oh, you haven't met Roya?
No.
No. Dark hair? No?
You know what's the name of Roya means?
I don't.
Dream.
Dream. Huh.
Dream. First name is-
Did you know that, Roya?
What?
She's logged in. Yeah, she's logged in.
No, I mean, I thought she's here.
Not gonna hear anything. Turn off the volume, bitch.
It's very easy to recognize Roya because she is the prettiest.
She's a dream woman.
Yes.
Oh,
prettiest
you
one
are
in
a
office.
sweetheart, Sonny. Thank you so much.
Roya, I love you.
So, Richard, are you looking for a dream woman?
Ah, you are so kind. Thank you.
What do you know her name?
Sorry, Richard, just want to remember everything.
Roya.
Mark Carmenza.
Good name.
As
Hey,
you
how
go.
are you? Come on in.
Very chic name.
So I just want to refresh my knowledge here.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, that means good things, Carmenza. You're ready to rock and roll.
I hope so. That's my idea this year.
Hi, how are you? Come on in. We might just have to grab a few more chairs, that's all. Okay, I think actually I don't need this here.
Please look at me.
Sure, it's probably easier for everybody if they're
Yeah,
sitting
yeah,
down.
I actually, funny story though, I took an Uber over here,
Yeah.
because we're in the middle of buying a new car. The car was in last light. And I was in the back of the Uber and I snagged his sweatshirt. Oh, because it looks like mine. But I tried it with one. Oh, yeah. I lost it last. Did you take an Uber?
Yeah. I'm Sarah, by the way.
Hi, Sarah. My name is Rich. How are you?
Should I not sit on the end here, or what do you think?
What's up to you? Because if you have your laptop, you can just follow
Dial in.
on. You don't have to look at the screen if you don't want to. And this is not your first rodeo, Maya. So
Yeah, it's very,
you've been through it
it's good
before.
timing though, because I think I'm gonna have to write one up soon.
Oh,
So-
gonna have to, huh? That sounds painful.
Gonna have to, yeah. I showed 4 properties last weekend. And I think these guys are close, so.
Richard, can I ask you a favor? If it's appropriate, would you do that?
Would I do what?
Like after this, we are some new agents here.
Mhm.
Give us a homework.
Homework, sure.
Hey, this is a pretend, this is the house, this is the address, go fill up it and bring it to me and I can.
All right, then I'll grade it.
Yeah. Is that?
You were that person in school, weren't you? Today.
The teacher's bad, huh? That was a good observation, I have to say, right? You were that person.
I don't know. Gotta be more confident.
That's funny.
Sarah.
Don't trip.
I saw that.
Okay.
Oh, I thought first you're gonna, will be. Good.
Marina Abramovich?
I'm sorry.
Like Marina Abramovich?
I don't
Think-
know.
The artist? Okay.
Or artist or the owner of one of the club in UK, the football, soccer.
Okay.
Does it end with WICC?
I think so, yeah.
Wow.
Okay, can everybody that's remote hear me? If somebody would just acknowledge that, that would be great.
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes, yes.
Thank you very
Yes,
much.
yes, we
That'd
can
be
hear
great.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I'm not going to go through the details of initiating a new contract. I'll just briefly do that. So we're going to write up a purchase contract. I'm going to click on new. You see the new button, the little green circle. I see everybody's looking at the screen. Okay, so new, right? Click on new. And then in our case, it's going to be a new purchaser offer. And then here we can just, as this is just simply a description, we can type in the property address, for example. And then before you actually write up an offer, you should actually have the MLS ID available to you. Because to the very right, you see MLS Connect. If we click on there, and I didn't do it this time, if you insert the MLS ID, it's going to import all of the information that the listing agent put into the MLS system itself. So it simplifies your life. It's going to put in the APN number. It's going to import the agent's license information, the brokerage's license information. Obviously, you have to put your own information in. So it's not going to know that since it doesn't know that you're writing an offer. But that will simplify your life in regards to writing a new offer. So now that I've done that, I have an offer that's been written. And so I open up my transaction. I would just go to documents. I've got a number of documents here, but what we're going to be focusing on are two different things. The cover sheet at this moment in time, and the California residential purchase agreement. So I prefer using the cover sheet. It simplifies what I'm doing. And now, not everybody has access to this, but there's Form Editor Classic. That is the older version, and it says it right there. And then the new Form Editor. If you're a new licensee or new to the Board of Realtors, you may not even have the Form Editor Classic. So we're going to use the new Form Editor.
And I'm sorry, how did you get to Zip Form Plus? Is it from CBDesk?
No, it is not. It's exterior. So it's zipformplus.com.
See, I went there and it's weird. It told me that I had to go from my respective.
From the CAR website. It depends which version you're using. You can do that also. If you go to CAR's website, then you can choose zip form and open that. No, not a problem. Not at all. So in my transaction cover sheets, my buyer's name is Mark Arcello. I'm just going to insert the name. So you can see I just have limited information. You don't have to put every bit of information in here. There's no reason for that. But what is important is the buyer's name and the email address. So that's critical in regards to what you're doing. The seller's name, we're going to make an assumption that before writing this up, I looked up the property on the MLS, and you can actually do that, and you can actually find the name of the seller. And you should be doing that. So you should determine what the seller's name is. So you have two options to make a determination who the seller is. Through the MLS, or if you have access to something called Property Profile, which your favorite title provider would provide, you can actually look up how the property is vested. And I prefer using Title Profile because often on the MLS, if it's in the name of a trust or an entity's name, the full information in terms of the actual legal name is not always available. So if we go to Property Profile, and that's another lesson, but we can actually pull up the underlying grant deed, for example, so we can see exactly how the property is vested. But in this case, it's going to be simple. It's just going to be Carlos Rodriguez, who is the seller. And I've got his email address in there. And then everything under property information, I didn't type this in. When I went through MLS Connect, it imported all of this information for me. So you can see what a time saver this is going to be. That just so happened I inserted the purchase price of $1 million. And then the date, it's certainly not October. Is the date 5th.
It's like the first portion of the transaction was the buyer though, right?
Yeah.
Did it have you enter the buyer in first?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Getting caught up.
No. Are you telling me when you're logged in?
I'm logged in and everything, but I just got presented with transaction information.
Okay, great.
And name.
So yeah, just put the buyer's name and their email address. And obviously if there's more than one buyer's name, you're going to list it here. And then also the questions always come up if the buyer is an entity, an LLC, for example, or a family trust, it's only one buyer. Likewise for the seller, it could be just, if it's a entity or a trust, it's only to be one seller. You may have separate individuals that are required to sign on behalf of that entity, and that likely is the case. For example, most revocable trusts that are associated with a family, if it's a married couple, then typically the trust will require both husband and wife to sign in their capacity of trustee. If it's an operating agreement or an LLC, which there's an operating agreement, then it could require at least one manager or more than one manager to sign the purchase contract. So it depends what kind of authority is granted that individual by the underlying documentation. And when you're representing an entity, keep in mind, you need to be asking for that entity's documentation, a trust certification, or the operating agreement, or articles of incorporation, depending upon the entity itself. At some point in time, escrow and title are going to need that documentation. So it does a couple things. You're going to be supplying information they need to begin with, and then more importantly, at this point in time, you need to know who has authority to sign on behalf of that entity, and that's very critical. What if there's two LLCs that are vested on the property? Well, you need to name both LLCs, and then you need to look at the operating agreements for both LLCs, and you need to determine who has the authority to act on behalf of those entities.
How did you get the transaction cover sheet?
Well, cheated, had it set up to begin with, but I'm going to save my changes.
Like there's different views. There's kind of like a live form view versus.
Actually, if we go back to the main, right. I hope I didn't log myself out. Okay, so under documents, actually, I'm in the transaction itself. And I would just to the top right in the blue box, you know what we need to do? We need to close that. Sure.
Recording in progress.
Okay, I don't know if that helps. So in the top right, you see the box called All Forms.
Uh-huh.
Just click on there.
Oh, so it has a cover sheet there?
Yes.
Oh,
And you can see virtually almost everything is in alphabetical order, excluding the California Residential Purchase Agreement and the cover sheet and the listing agreement. So there's a couple of things that precede all of the forms that are in the library itself.
Mhm.
So I would have just clicked on cover sheet actually, and I would actually choose California Residential Purchase Agreement to add that to my transaction.
I see. Thank you.
Does that help? Okay.
Yes, of course.
Okay. So all the information is in there. I just happen to put in Sterling escrow, but then the other thing that's going to be populated, the buyer's broker information will not be populated. You do need to insert that information, and that's required for confirmation of agency, and that's required statutorily. So be sure to complete all this information because it shows up on page 1 of the residential purchase agreement, and also page 16 of the signature page of the RPA. In addition to that, you can see seller's broker information. That's all information that was just pulled from the MLS because I use MLS Connect. So I don't have to type in that information. And then beyond that, you don't need to insert anything else. And then I would click on save. And what's kind of neat about the newer version, to the right-hand side, you can see just under the word add, it just shows cover sheet. That's the document I'm currently working on. But also I can just simply click on California Residential Purchase Agreement to bring that into my desktop so I can easily work on that form also at this point in time.
And you did the same for the cover sheet? I just missed that.
Yes.
So you click on all forms and then search for cover, or just select cover sheet?
Actually, yeah, it just happens to be right at the top of the list.
Yeah,
So it simplifies it for you. So now I've added that to my desktop. I moved California residential purchase agreement to my desktop. I just clicked on it. So for some of us, this is going to be repetitive, but we don't have any choice, as a matter of fact. The first page in the purchase contract consists of the disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship, and this is required by law. So we don't do this just because it's fun. That very first checkbox, you do not do anything. You would check that box if there is a lease in excess of 1 year. Otherwise, confirmation of agency is not required. However, we require confirmation of agency for every single transaction. And it describes the duties and the fiduciary obligations of whether you're a buyer's agent or a seller's agent. So it's nothing but a basic standard disclosure required by law. And you can see then we've got the names of the buyer populated, Mark Ochoa, and it populated the information in regards to the real estate broker firm representing the seller also, or the buyer, excuse me. And then the second page of the confirmation of agency, there are no signatures required, no initials required, but you can see in the very center of the block, it says confirmation. I'm trying to highlight it, but it's just not working for me. But it says do not complete sample only. So the exact block that you're seeing here is showing up on page 1 of the RPA. And this is something that you're required to complete on the residential purchase agreement. Fair housing and discrimination advisory. I suggest everybody read this. Discrimination occurs in many different forms. It could be discriminating against somebody because they have a pet. That's how simple it would be, as a matter of fact. So keep that in mind. And we never want to use certain terms when addressing anybody. Then the next form included in the package is a possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. This tells your buyers and or sellers that I could be representing multiple buyers on a transaction for the same property. So it's putting them on notice. It's disclosing that. Also, I could have a listing, and you'll see this associated with the listing agreement. It's telling the seller that I'm not only listing your property, but I could be listing 6 identical properties right down the street from you also. So it's putting them on notice. And also, you could be representing both buyer and seller, because people sometimes have an adverse reaction when you may be representing both buyer and seller. And they'll claim you never told them, but you had them sign a disclosure. Keep in mind you have an obligation to review all of these documents with your clients. And then wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory, it's just putting everybody on notice. Don't just send money. If you're going to be wiring money to escrow, you should call the escrow officer in advance to confirm the written wire instructions that they received. There's so much fraud going on. Emails are intercepted and people change the routing numbers, and money is wired to the wrong recipient, and the money is typically never recoverable, especially if it goes out of the country. All right, so the purchase contract. Just close that, make it larger. Hopefully we can see that better. All right. The date to prepare, the top left-hand corner. So December 5th, it's very simple. But that date is always important, because what's going to happen, we're going to have a couple of dates on the purchase contract. We're going to have the date prepared. We're going to have the date that it's signed. And the date signed is never the reference date that you use when, for example, adding an addendum to the purchase contract. We always use the date prepared. So if I issue an addendum to the purchase contract, it's going to ask me the date of the document, and the date's going to be December 5th, even though people may have signed it December 10th. And you can see this is an offer from Mark Ochoa, the address, all of that's populated for us. And we talked about confirmation of agency. And under section 2B, we have to identify who we are representing. So in this case, Coldwell-Banker Platinum Properties and Mike Dunn, he's representing the seller, and Richard Moore is representing the buyer. Now the exception, if it is the same broker's license number, it is considered dual agency, and we would check the box, both buyer and seller. We're just going to make the presumption today that the brokerages are separate entities and not using the same license number. And also keep that in mind. if you're taking a listing contract, and I'm deviating, but there are times that the seller will say, well, if you represent both buyer and seller, do I get a discount? And maybe you agree to something like that, because I'm, instead of charging you 5%, I'll charge you 4% if I'm representing both buyer and seller. Now, keep in mind, you must modify that listing agreement to say that if Richard Moore represents both buyer and seller, then you're going to pay a lower commission if I'm willing to do that. If you don't specify that, and it's two people from the same brokerage, it's dual agency, they're entitled to the discount, even though you individually are not representing both buyer and seller.
Definitely gonna write it down.
Yeah.
Never know. Like,
Yeah, we don't want to make that mistake. Exactly. Anyone have any questions?
So you're waiting for buyers to ask you, do I get a lower?
No, usually, no, in this case, I was just referring to taking a listing contract. Because often sellers think that you have multiple buyers and you're going to represent both parties. Only in 6% of cases do I see dual representation. But to convince them, saying, hey, that's great. I'm willing to give you a discount in your listing contract if I represent both buyer and seller. Well, just want to be careful. You have to specify your own name, not just the brokerage itself. Because if myself and Maya are on the contract, if I didn't specify that it's Richard Moore representing both, then I could still, there's not going to be, I'm still going to be giving the discount to the seller. I don't know if that makes sense. So specify your name. If only if you yourself represent both buyer and seller, will the seller be entitled to a discount? And that's assuming you're willing to offer that kind of a concession to a seller. So that's outside of the scope of the purchase contract, but I just wanted to mention that. So section 3A, and if you look under the paragraph number, it refers to the paragraphs, the underlying paragraphs associated with each of these line items. So if you need further detail, which you should read, it's going to tell you exactly the paragraphs to refer to. So in our case, to simplify life, we're going to say the purchase price is $1 million. I'm going to change this to an all cash offer. If it is an all cash offer, the presumption is that there is no loan contingency. So you don't need to specify that there is no loan contingency because the language within the contract already makes that determination for you. But I'm not going to say it's an all cash offer. And then close of escrow. Typically, I do not suggest inserting a specific date because if it takes 20 days to get the contract accepted and you might be at the close of escrow date there. So I suggest saying 30 days. And we could even add language down below which says maybe 30 days or sooner if we want. And there's a difference because escrow is not going to close unless it's on the 30th day. If we say 30 days or sooner, then if all the parties agree sooner, it's a simple process. And then the expiration of offer. So keep in mind in this specific case, it's 3 calendar days after all buyer signatures. So let's assume I have my buyer. It's 2 individuals on the purchase contract. One signs today, one signs tomorrow. And I deliver the contract tomorrow. With that said, there's only 2 more days before the offer expires. So it's after the date of the last buyer signature. And when it's calendar days, it can expire on a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. So that's expiration of an event can occur on a weekend or legal holiday if it's before contract acceptance. There's a difference because after contract acceptance, if the execution of event, for example, removing a contingency, falls on a weekend or legal holiday, then the expiration of the contingency falls to the following business day. All right, so calendar days. And then the initial deposit amount. We're going to say, in this case, 3% or $30,000.
Is that a standard? Is there a recommended initial deposit?
You know, if it's a highly competitive property, then I suggest putting down 3%. So that would be my approach at this point in time. And here's the other example. If it's a primary residence, this does not apply to investment property. Let's assume you really want to get aggressive and show the seller, God, I really want this property. Well, if I put down $100,000, realistically, that's a 10% initial deposit, correct? But the liquidated damages clause limits the buyer's exposure to only 3% on a primary residence. If it's an investment property, there's no cap when it comes to liquidated damages. So if I put $100,000 down, it's an investment property purchase, theoretically, my entire deposit is at risk, not just 30,000 of it. And then here's the other thing I want you to say. What if I change this to $20,000? Now it changes the percentage, right? But look at the paragraph below, or the parentheses below. The percentage number above is for calculation purposes only. It's not a contractual item. So what is that saying? If I offer $1 million and I said I'm going to put a $30,000 initial deposit down, if for some reason we agree to a $2 million purchase price, the initial deposit remains at $30,000. It is not a percentage that's going to change. It's just the dollar amount that you're inserting in there. And then to the right, D1, 5A1, you can see it states within 3 or so many business days after acceptance by wire transfer. Well, why is that an anomaly? Because this is the only aspect of the purchase contract that talks about business days. So if acceptance is, what's today? Thursday? Wednesday? Tuesday? Well, let's assume today's Thursday. Get my facts straight here. And everybody signs a contract, it's delivered, we have acceptance. So, and we leave the default at 3 business days. The buyer does not have to deposit their money until the close of Tuesday. It's a long ways off. If today's Thursday, Friday is business day 1, Monday is business day 2, Tuesday is business day 3. So that's a long time. Keep that in mind when you're a listing agent. You may want to accelerate that or counter that and say 1 business day. Because otherwise, buyers get cold feet sometimes, and then they hesitate and they don't deposit their money. And your client's wondering, when are they going to deposit their money? I want to make sure we're going forward, and I want their deposit at risk. So you can adjust that. And then the increased deposit, if it's rare that we see it. Let's assume there's a specific event reached. It's more for commercial transactions, but upon reaching that event, maybe I've got an entitlement, I'm going to increase my deposit. The loan amount, we're just going to make an assumption that the total loan amount is going to be $800,000, and you can see it calculates the percentage for us. And then financing, the presumption is that it is a fixed rate loan, and I have a percentage in there of 7.25%. And why would I put a rate in there? If interest rates go to 8% today, even if the buyer qualifies, it's a valid contingency or reason for the buyer to cancel. So it protects your client. So if interest rates today are 7%, put 7.25% there. There should be some form of flexibility. Otherwise, a listing agent is probably going to counter you anyways. So you want to make your offers clean. But it's a protection clause. That's really what it comes down to.
But if you do release all contingencies or the contingency on the loan, then this doesn't apply.
It will not apply once you release that. Correct. Once you release that contingency.
I'm curious, what's the feel for the market right now? And
Well, I
are people still releasing all contingencies?
With offers?
Yeah.
No one's doing
When
that.
we made our offer a year and a half ago, our agent was pressuring us to release all contingencies, and I was like,
Yeah, I'd be hesitant about that too. Yeah, I can't blame you. So with that said, now the other thing that's really critical about this and what people don't understand, or your clients aren't going to understand, when I said I'm going to put 80% down, then first of all, if I increase my purchase price to $2 million in our example, then that 80% is going to be $1.6 million loan. And so it's going to adjust automatically. It's unlike the initial deposit, which doesn't change. However, if your client, let's just assume it's an $800,000 loan, we agree to $1 million purchase price. If your client decides that I'm going to instead only put $100,000 down and I'm going to pursue a loan for $900,000, if your client is denied that financing, they cannot cancel based upon the loan contingency. So you're telling the seller, I'm going to pursue a loan 80% down, in this case, $800,000. If the buyer deviates from that and is denied the financing, they can't cancel on the loan contingency. And there's a couple of reasons. First of all, contract specifically states that the seller's relying on that type of financing that you placed in here. And then also, what if I change this and say, I'm going to put 30% down and get a loan for $700,000? Well, the down payment is not a contingency of the purchase contract. So if I don't have $300,000 in that example, and I can't get the $300,000, first of all, that's a contractual covenant. It is not a contingency, and you can't cancel based upon the fact that you don't have the money for the down payment. That would be a breach. And then let's see, to the right, the default aspect or the default financing we're saying we're going to obtain is conventional financing. Now we can, if we're going to get an FHA loan or a VA loan, we're going to check the appropriate box. And then for FHA or VA, there are other special stipulations. And if we look down just a little bit farther in the same block, it says if FHA or VA checked, deliver lender required repairs, first of all. And then there's something else called an amendatory clause. So we have two different things happening here. If it's an FHA or VA loan, property standards must be at a certain level. And if the appraiser goes out there and it doesn't meet certain property standards, what if there's no stone, no flooring? It's not going to meet the standards. So if the seller isn't willing to correct those deficiencies, the loan's going to fail. Keep that in mind.
I've seen that recently. They called it an unwarranted.
Well, unwarranted condos would be a separate, FHA or VA is not going to provide financing on an unwarranted condo.
Okay, so that's not necessarily.
Yeah. But that's a good question. What is, it's actually a non-warrantable condo. What can that, why is it non-warrantable? First of all, that means that Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, who buys all loans from traditional lenders, is not going to buy that loan. And why? It could be a number of reasons. It could be that the reserves are underfunded, for example.
That's the listing I ran into.
Yeah.
That was the situation.
So that's the case. It probably funded 15% or so of the mandatory reserves. So you can't get traditional financing. You're going to have to get financing from someone that provides non-warrantable financing.
Which just means that if that persists and you come around to wanting to sell the property, you have less people
who are going to qualify, exactly, because there's fewer lenders that are going to provide financing for non-warrantable condos. Correct. And then the other thing that's important about FHA or VA financing and what's associated with that is something called an amendatory clause. And that's required under law, and every lender is going to require it. So if I say that I'm going to get FHA or VA financing, the amendatory clause becomes a contractual obligation of all the parties. And the amendatory clause, let's see, do we have a question there?
Yeah.
Chat box.
You answered it already.
No, actually, you know, that makes a good, I think they make a good point because I remember just my own experience, pre-qualified versus pre-approved, right? In this particular case, they could just be pre-qualified, right?
Yeah, I think you both bring up a good point and something I passed over, unfortunately, which I shouldn't have, just so we can understand the difference. I'll assume we were there. No, we're not there yet. So the amendatory, we've all heard of an appraisal contingency. If the appraisal doesn't come in at the purchase price, the buyer can cancel or renegotiate the purchase price. However, with FHA or VA, not only is there an appraisal contingency, but there's also something called the amendatory clause. And it means even if the buyer releases their appraisal contingency and the purchase price does not equal or exceed the purchase price, the buyer, for any reason, can cancel without any repercussions. And they can do that up to the date of close of escrow, and they can keep that property tied up in escrow.
So regardless of releasing contingencies for FHA only and VA?
And VA, correct, yes. Section E2, let's say we had secondary financing, a second deed of trust, for example. We don't see that very often now. It doesn't seem to be very prominent. Section E3, occupancy type. the default is a primary occupancy. And if it's going to be secondary or investment, you're going to check the box. So remember, the liquidated damages clause is far different if it's a primary residence versus a secondary or investment property. There's no limitation in regards to what the damages could be, but it's not going to ever exceed the initial deposit. So it's important also because you're looking at it and you're speaking to your client, you're going to, you need to know if they're buying this for investment purposes or as a primary residence, because your pre-qualification letter should reflect that if it's an investment property or a primary residence. Because if I'm a listing agent and you're saying it's a primary residence, you're saying it's an investment property, but you have a pre-approval or pre-qual for primary residence, I'm going to say, give me another letter. I'm not going to accept your offer at that point in time. That would be my approach. And then seller credit, if any, to buyer. Well, we can just simply ask for a credit that the buyer can use to pay closing costs. And closing costs are what can be used for. It could be non-recurring costs. It could be title fees, escrow fees. Also, it could be used for recurring charges, such as property taxes. So when the transaction closes, there's going to be a proration of property taxes between the seller and the buyer. And let's assume the buyer is going to have their taxes and insurance impounded, and it could be as many as 8 months worth of property taxes and insurance. You can use a credit to pay those things through escrow. Now, the higher the loan to value, the lower the credit lender is going to allow. And if there is a credit, you should notify, maybe it's not addressed up front here, simplify it. But if there is ever a credit negotiated, you have a requirement to notify the lender as soon as possible, because it has to go through underwriting again for the lender to approve that. And then additional finance terms. Now I have this sentence typed in there.
Sorry,
No.
what did you say we have to notify the credit?
The lender,
The lender.
the buyer's lender, correct.
So in this case, this could be property tax or tax withheld, impounded, because the seller is foreign, for example.
No, that's a separate aspect actually in regards to, yeah, that, right. That's if they would be a non-resident alien and there's withholding of a portion of the seller's proceeds. This would be if I'm a buyer and I'm getting financing and I want to have my taxes impounded. So twice a year, I don't have to make the payment. The lender's going to make the payment for me. And likewise, I can have my insurance payments or premiums impounded also. So the lender makes those payments on my behalf. But it's a big hit, depending upon the time of year, if you have to have 8 months worth of property taxes impounded and the insurance, right? Most likely for a year. So in the event there is a credit, let's assume the credit, and I've got an extensive credit of $50,000 in there. If the credit exceeds the closing costs, if you do not address that, as I did in section D2, where I said any unused or unapplied seller credit shall be used to reduce the purchase price by a like amount, your buyer could lose that credit. So if I negotiated a $50,000 credit, my total closing costs are only $30,000. If I don't have this language in there, the buyer could lose that $20,000 difference. And they're going to look to us, say, why didn't you do that properly?
Would you please say that where should we address that?
G2.
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 Thank you.
That seems like a major gotcha.
Yeah.
That is.
It's so important.
Because so many things are calculated and dynamic when you check the box, but that's like just a blurb that needs to be in there, huh?
And the contract specifically addresses the fact that you'll lose that if you don't address that.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question, Ryan?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Section G3, and this could become much more prominent as time goes on. You know, everybody's probably heard about the litigation associated with the fact that they believe there's antitrust violations because the sellers are paying for the buyer's agent's commissions. So anyways, let's assume that you decide to have a buyer representation agreement signed by your buyer, which you're more than welcome to do, and we certainly suggest it. And a buyer representation agreement is simply like a listing contract, right? So that's telling you that the buyer is obligating to pay you a certain amount of commissions, no matter where they buy, if you use an exclusive contract. Well, in that buyer representation agreement, it could be stating that the buyer agrees to pay you, the agent, 3% of the purchase price. Now, in the MLS, we know that listing agents offer commissions, at least currently, to the agent representing the buyer. So what if only 2% is offered on there? Well, in this, if we were to check this box and add this form, we're not going to go through it at this point in time, we would be requesting the seller to pay that additional 1%. So that's a way of addressing it.
Wow, this is really good. This is a new one, right?
Yeah.
This one I think is new.
Here's a better way of doing it, I think, though. If I have a buyer representation agreement and the compensation offered on the MLS is less than what my buyer is willing to pay, what I would do is in section G1, ask for just a simple credit. Because if the buyer is paying their agent's commissions, it's acceptable by a lender and it's considered a closing cost. And I think it just makes the negotiations easier, as a matter of fact. Now, it wasn't my idea, it was Mark Ochoa that suggested that to me, and I thought it was a great idea. So if I have a buyer representation agreement, which I'm entitled to 3%, the MLS is only offering me, as the buyer's agent, only 2%. There's still that 1%. So instead of negotiating with the seller, in which the seller now looks at me thinking I'm being greedy, just check G1 and add for an additional credit right there. And that will help the buyer tell the buyer, look, this is going to pay for your commissions you want me. I think it's a better presentation, actually.
And you tell something for a buyer.
Yeah.
Buyer will be really happy to work with you.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, here in G2, if we look at the SPBV, which we're not going to do at this moment in time, or G3 rather, it's going to be a negotiation of paying the additional credit, and everybody starts looking at us and thinking we're greedy. But can't you just accept 2%? Well, no, I don't want to accept 2%, right? So let's
My word.
yeah, everybody forgets that, Cameron. Section H1, verification of all cash. So section H1, 2, and 3. There's something that's synonymous among all three of these items. The default to verification of all cash, for example, it's saying it's attached to the offer. So it's already defaulting to saying, hey, submit the verification with the offer. It's not saying after. Same thing with verification of down payment and closing costs and verification of loan application. So verification of all cash. You've got a buyer and he's paying all cash for the property. Well, you need a bank statement, you need an investment account statement, and I suggest not having a statement from a foreign country. If I'm a listing agent, I am likely to not accept that. So I don't know what the exchange rate is. Can they get the money out of the country? There's things that come into play. So I want to see all their funds patriated in this country. And then if you're representing the buyer, just redact the account number. They don't have to, you don't have to get the buyer, the seller that information. And then the other thing to keep in mind when you're representing a party is we know in this case, the buyer's name is Mark Ochoa. So when you get a bank statement from the buyer whose name is Mark Ochoa, make sure that the account holder is Mark Ochoa, not somebody else. He may not have control over those funds. And if I'm a listing agent, I'm going to question that also. If you're getting a gift, make sure there's a gift letter in there stating that mom and dad provided the bank statement so they can see all of that. So when you're working with buyers, you need to be sure that they have the money, right? Let's do that.
It all seems so unofficial, though, you know, I mean, people can mock up anything they want to.
Can, yeah.
I mean, obviously, they're subject to.
But what's the point if they don't have money and they open the escrow, like,
Yeah.
they're gonna be in trouble, and what's the point? They don't have money to buy something.
But
But what's the purpose, like later on?
Never underestimate people's stupidity.
We don't see it very often. I think usually what people don't have, they don't have all of the money at that point in time, and they're putting themselves at risk. So you should be telling them, if you don't have all the money, you could very well lose your deposit, right? If you can't qualify. If you don't have your down payment. So the verification of a down payment and closing costs. So I'm getting a loan in this case. I'm putting $200,000 down. But verification of down payment and closing costs, what does that mean? I should have a statement showing I have at least $200,000 plus the additional money for the closing costs. So maybe 220.
How
What about verification of a loan application?
Uh-huh.
So,
Well, that would be a pre-qual, pre-approval, or a fully underwritten pre-approval letter.
so that's a letter that, I mean, loan officer would provide, right?
Correct, correct.
Okay.
So in that case, and this is something Richard brought up before, or Maya, there's different forms, pre-qualification. It's very simple. I contacted my lender and I told him verbally that I'm making $500,000 a year, and he ran my credit. That's a pre-qual. Pre-approval, I've actually provided income documentation, W-2s, maybe tax returns, things of that nature. And the letter should specify whether they've been provided documentation or not. That's how you can differentiate. Then it's rare, but we see it, a fully underwritten pre-approval. So an underwriter's actually reviewed it and issued a conditional approval. Any questions so far?
No, thank
I
you.
imagine in a certain market, that would be a real leg up then maybe, right?
Yeah,
Fully
it is.
underwritten, ready to go.
All right. In a hot market, lenders don't do it because they're too busy. Today, they're likely to provide you with a fully underwritten
It
pre-approval.
could mean you could close in less than 30 days too. probably.
Well, just the assurance of closing is much more likely because they've reviewed all the documentation. So, but it's still going to be conditional. It's still going to be conditioned upon a valid appraisal, for example. Also making sure that the person who's applying for a loan didn't lose their job, things like that. Final verification of condition. Well, the contract states that 5 days before the stated close of escrow, the buyer is entitled to go through the property and review the condition of the property. Now, that doesn't mean going in and looking for additional repairs. What it does state that if I found the house and the grass was green, but now 30 days later it's brown, that's not the same condition in which I found the property. The seller has an obligation to provide the property in the same condition in which the buyer found it. Likewise, if the stove is working and it's not working, well, that's something to point out. If the seller agreed to repairs, and that's more the purpose of this, then you should verify that those repairs are done. Now, the question that always comes up, what if the repairs aren't complete? Well, can I just cancel? No, you can't just cancel. But if it's a material item, so let's assume there's a crack in the slab and maybe there's a fallacy, but they're to repair it. If they didn't repair that, in my opinion, that's a material item, substantial in cost. That's probably a valid reason for the buyer to cancel, even though removed all contingencies. If there's a doorknob missing, is that a valid reason for a buyer to cancel? Probably not. So they could be held in breach of contract possibly if they don't close. And the question always comes up, well, what can I do to them about that? Well, you may have to go to small claims court, or maybe we bluff them and say, we're not going to close. Let's get it fixed. But ultimately, the materiality of the issue is going to be at stake. And then assignment request. So 17 days after acceptance. So we see this quite often. Somebody places a name on the purchase contract and they decide that they want to assign their interest in that purchase contract to another entity or person. Now, California law does not prohibit assignments, and theoretically, a seller cannot reasonably withhold an assignment, but there are different forms of assignment. So Richard Moore's name was on the purchase contract, and I decided I want to assign my interest to my family's revocable trust. Well, the seller cannot withhold approval of that assignment. The contract addresses that actually. But let's assume it's Richard Moore and he's assigning it to an LLC. Well, how does the seller know that the LLC is going to perform? Well, the seller has the opportunity to say to the LLC, you need to prove to me you can afford to buy the property before I agree to the assignment. Okay? So there's different forms of assignment. And investors do it many times. As a matter of fact, they may assign their interest to somebody else. And then when creating the assignment, what they have to disclose or what's being asked of them is to just be disclosed, is there some type of monetary value associated with the assignment? So if I'm assigning my interest to Maya, is Maya paying me for that assignment of my interest? So that's something that would be disclosed, for example, make all parties aware if there is a fee being paid, for example, or something of monetary value. Investigation of property is kind of self-explanatory. You can perform any number of inspections on a property, assuming they're not invasive. What does that mean? No cutting holes in the walls, things like that. You can get permission possibly. So inspection reports, and remember, sometimes people think that the seller has the obligation to pay for these inspections. Seller has no obligation. So any investigations are at the expense of the buyer. And then once investigations are performed, even following termination of the contract, if closes or not, the buyer has an obligation to provide those reports to the seller. What about an appraisal? So you have to provide the seller with the appraisal. No, it's an opinion of value. It is not an investigatory report. So you don't have to give them the appraisal. The only time you'd have to do that is if you're canceling based upon the appraisal contingency. So I said, I'm buying at $1 million. The appraisal came in at 900,000. I want to cancel. So at that point in time, you'd have to provide it if you want your money
Yeah,
released.
question. Okay, so what you just said, every investigation to the property buyer gonna pay for it, right?
Mhm.
What about termite? Termite normally seller pay for it, right?
Well, if you put that in the contract, you can assign payment. That's something that seems to be customarily assigned to the seller in terms of paying for that report.
You have to write it down.
Yes,
If you don't write it down, supposed to buyer pay for it.
yes, correct.
I always think it's seller, but
Yes.
because I always, everybody always telling me section
What?
one,
Yes.
section one clearance with that. So I
Yes,
said, okay, so now I understand.
No, but that's a good question. Actually, we'll touch upon that because Richard also had a question about that too. And then informational access to the property is not a contingency. It doesn't create cancellation rights. All that's saying to the buyer is you've got 17 days after acceptance to complete all of your studies and investigations. And now, for the most part, sellers are reasonable and will allow buyers to continue to come back in. But other times buyers don't stop and the seller says no more. So you can't access the property further. So that's up to the seller. Obviously, we want to close it. We probably want to be accommodating, but to what extent, that's always questionable. And then review of seller documents. Well, seller documents are pretty extensive. Assuming an exemption doesn't exist, the transfer disclosure statement, seller property questionnaire. What else? NHD report, for example, fire hazard disclosure reports. So there are a number of items that the seller has an obligation to provide. And the seller has an obligation to provide those documents, all the seller disclosures within 7 days following acceptance. And then keep in mind, all these disclosures, it's your obligation to review these disclosures with your client. Don't just say, sign here, right? Review it with them. Because if something happens, they're going to say, oh no, Richard never reviewed those with me. And if they don't want to, just say, before you sign any contingencies or you sign the disclosures, I want to schedule an appointment with you to review these documents. Just tell them, all right, let's set this appointment. And if they choose to not do it, that's at their discretion. But we want to make sure we tell them we want to review these documents.
If they decide not to, like even after you say like we can set an appointment at a later date, and they decide not to, should we get something in writing?
Yeah, it can be just as simple as an email. Say, you decided to not obviously review those documents tonight, right? Yeah. Yes, email is acceptable. Preliminary title report. Please review that. Sonny, you had an example, right? Were there 35 exceptions on that report? So don't take anything for granted on the preliminary title report in regards to how it could affect a buyer and how it could affect the transaction in general. So in your case, there was a prohibition. They had to meet certain, was it income requirements?
The one is you have to sell that property to is that what you're talking about, like
Yes.
housing authority first?
Yes, the housing, right, get the housing authority the first right of refusal.
If they don't want it, that property, so you can put on the market, but they have a priority to, they decide to buy your property or not. You have to let them know it's in St. Pedro. So that is a condo complex.
What
happened? Do you mind it or do you want to? You can address it with them. Okay.
Actually, I joined our office not that long ago, like
Yeah.
less than 2 years. I'm not really comfortable with read a prelim, title report, but it's very important from my past experience. Because sometimes you can see there's like a reverse mortgage. You want to make sure how much money they took out from the mortgage from the house. You need to talk to find out, right?
Yeah.
And also for these cases, and I send, because there's so many pages just so many pages. I just sent it to Rich, then he to, review for me. And Rich is really detailed. There's something like under some items, and he find out there is a saying is, so that property, if you want, I was presenting the buyer, if you want to buy that property, you have to let Los Angeles Housing Authority know first. So they say, hey, I'm selling the property. Do you want to buy or not? And they said, oh, no, I don't want to buy that. So you can sell on the market, but you have to let them know first. But if you didn't tell them you put on the market, it's like the whole transaction is they can cancel it. Can you imagine you help your buyer bought the property, close everything, and when they leave there and then someone knock on the door and say, no, this is transaction should be canceled because we have to authority to know.
So
Yeah,
it's
that-
like for LA County.
Yeah, that is
For this
authority for,
specific project, it is
Yeah.
not for LA
Oh,
County, but
So-
that's the point.
But it
You
was
come
like-
across these anomalies.
There was like zoning there where they had to have the option to
Yes.
provide it at low income.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's exactly really smart.
And then, yeah.
Because why they're doing this, because, that authority, they want to help people, they're low income. It's like government kind of benefit for them. So I think probably they have a deal with the developer when they just build.
They
that.
did to get the entitlements,
Perfect.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So later on, we find out that I was so surprised, like, oh my God, and I contact listing agent and she had no idea what's going on. Can you imagine it's your listing
So
and
if
you don't know?
completed the transaction, that would be considered cloud on title.
Totally.
Yeah, it runs with the property,
It was
right?
really scary. I asked her, and also I asked their title company because it's not Mary. Mary, she is very knowledgeable. If you have any questions, you can ask her, even like it's not your listing. She helped me a lot. But their title is really horrible. They didn't know. They didn't know.
Then, yeah,
They
there's
didn't know.
no
And I said,
research.
what am I gonna do? Like, what am I gonna do?
Where do you find this information?
Well, if you've ever looked at a preliminary title report, it's going to show all the exceptions of the items that the buyer is taking the property subject to. It could be an easement. That's probably a more
Yeah.
simplified one. So it's gonna have, they're going to ensure title, but then they're going to say for these items under the heading of exceptions, we're not going to insure you against. And so that was one of the items of which the title policy would not have insured the buyer. It's an exception on the report. But it's not as simple as reading the report, because when you get the report, there are live links associated with each exception. So we had to read all of the underlying documents associated with it. And that goes back to what, the 70s or so? So trying to read these documents that are so old and from the county recorder's office, it's not always necessarily clear.
It is a very interesting part. As a listing agent, she didn't know, she already put on her MS and she didn't know. We asked the title and they didn't know. And the listing agent got totally scared, and she went to the authority, the department in local.
But
So
in
she
this
was
case, it's an obstacle, but there was still no cloud on title, right?
Oh,
Because their prior transaction, had they followed the correct
Mm.
procedure?
No, they didn't
no.
either.
So that's
No,
why,
no.
that's through cloud on
Yeah.
title, right?
So later on, so the listing agent went to the authority, department to find out what's going on, but nobody know. No one know. Even like we asked them, do you know this a policy? Do you know that? I said, no, I didn't really know. Later on, I asked Mary, our title,
Yeah.
and Mary just like they search because it's database, and then she find out there's a waiver. Like it's a 1998, there's a waiver. So that rules doesn't, they expire already in 1998. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just so happy. And I sent that documents to the title, their title. So that, the house can still, like insurance, the title pretty much is an insurance.
Yes. So we demanded that they remove that exception. So
Exception.
now if somebody made a claim at some later point, that title insurance policy would have insured our buyer
Okay.
against a claim or a breach of that first right of refusal.
One of my main questions would be like if I was in the position of the other realtor,
Mhm.
how would one go about figuring out if there is if we have like a title person, how do we figure out if there's like a clouded title
Ahead
without?
of time.
They should have been doing exactly what we did.
Yeah.
They get that preliminary title report at the same time the buyer does, also in the agent representing the buyer.
Especially the other realtor just didn't review the.
No,
Okay.
And also I even.
I didn't know if there was like a special thing that we had to do to figure that out. I was like.
There is, you need a full preliminary title report to
Okay,
make that
that's what I thought. I just
determination.
didn't know because she didn't know it. I was like, what?
Sometimes you're thinking as an agent, okay, so I just send all the documents to your clients and they will review because they can read it, right?
Yeah.
You're thinking you don't have any like
Other
reason.
responsibilities.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's everything something wrong. They're gonna, they're gonna sue us for for
So
sure.
she was just lazy.
You were like, we
But it
have
sounds to
to.
me like people wait until the transaction to figure this all out.
Title will not, it's rare that they'll order a prelim for you. It costs them hard dollars,
Right,
actually. You
right,
can get a property profile, but it's not gonna show.
So
up
there's
in
a
the
risk you're
website.
taking as the listing agent of all this, these unknowns,
You
right?
should be reviewing that once you get that information, right?
But that's at the time of the transaction, right?
Yeah, or you ask,
Or the
you
person.
ask the buyer, hopefully hopefully the seller knows.
Yeah.
No.
Separate question, for cost of the preliminary title, who pays for that?
Seller.
We'll
The seller.
identify, yeah, seller pays for the owner's policy, the buyer's gonna pay for the lender's policy.
Okay, so, and then they just give that to us when we review it.
Yes,
Okay.
there's no charge up front though.
There's two things I learned from this deal.
Mhm.
So as an agent, you're a good agent. You have to overlook everything for your clients. Pretty much you're buying your property for yourself too. Don't think about sending everything to your clients. They review it, they can read it, and you don't have any responsibility. It's everything, it's something wrong, it's always you're involved.
Yeah.
And second thing I learned, I feel like doing like a title, this business. Instead of, everybody saying my company is really good, trying to work with you, but I think doing this kind of business need many years experience. Mary, she has been doing this for many years. You ask someone how many years have been in this business, like 5 years, 6 years, it won't work. They call a lot, many years experience. I'm so glad I have Mary, and she didn't get paid because I'm not listing agent, but she was helping me, and I really appreciate her. And also, of course, Rich find out this is a huge problem. So you guys know what is like a title insurance, what that means, the title?
Yeah.
It's an insurance. If something wrong, they cover it. But if they didn't address, or if they address that and you didn't remove it, so they won't cover. That would be a big problem for
Yeah,
the
because
client.
they've communicated.
They tell you there's something in there.
So like back to that listing agent scenario, if you say to your, seller, you ask them about title, but do they have access to information at no cost or low cost that you could get as due diligence?
No,
No.
it should have been disclosed, but obviously the prior transaction, my guess is it was never disclosed to that seller.
But in this condition, what if actually, you don't know that, and then the transaction is completed,
Mhm.
and then, then the LA kind of, the house department saying, okay, we're going to cancel this, but later you find out, okay, this policy has expired, like,
It's okay,
5-10 years ago.
right?
Then,
So here's what would happen.
No.
If it remained an exception on the title report,
Mhm.
then the title company would not insure it, and the buyer, the property owner would be on their own to defend themselves.
Yeah. They're gonna sue us for sure.
But if you had the title companies, we did remove that. Now they're insuring against those things. They're only not going to insure those items that are listed on the policy.
okay.
It's the exact opposite. Most insurance policies, it tells you what they insure against, and then they tell you the exclusions, right? The title policy just virtually, for the most part, says, these are the items we're not going to insure. So if it happens, that's your problem. So you have to many times work to get those exceptions removed from that title report to be sure your client is insured against those items. So a couple of other simpler examples, that was a difficult.
Yeah, that was really difficult. And also I'm so glad Mary find out the waiver, because the way how they find out, they need many years experience, how you search in the database. The way how you search in the database is there.
Yes, it's done manually.
Right.
They're searching title. A lot of it's title, it's manual.
So that is why I'm so glad I'm here, in our office. Everybody do their outstanding work. Like
I mean, I've only heard good things, so,
Just turn the other way if someone says something negative. Okay?
No, you should know by now, I'm a snarky one in the office.
I've noticed. So more recent example, Laguna Beach. Irvine's relatively simple. Laguna Beach transaction closed on Laguna Canyon Road. Other people have heard this already, but there was a conditional use permit associated with this 4-unit condominium. And it was limited to occupancy by an artist, a work-live artist. So you had to prove to the city of Laguna Beach, you get a license, that you are licensed or you conduct, your living is from being an artist. And if you can't, then you can't occupy the unit, you can own it. So sure enough, we had a transaction. Nobody read the prelim. It's also included in the real property report for the city of Laguna Beach, talking about this conditional use permit. It's not clear. So you have to, read the underlying documents. Then also in the common interest disclosures, there was an item about that. So the transaction closed. The buyer had no idea that they were subject to this requirement. Theoretically, they're not entitled to occupy the property. Another neighbor found out, but then one other property, their agent, they found out in advance because the seller never disclosed it. So that agent went down to the city of Laguna Beach, found out about the requirements, and then they got their client qualified. So there were two individuals in there, one of which was our client, who then sued the seller. There were two listing agents, two listing brokerages. So sued the seller, also sued us. So for us to get out of that in terms of the $70,000 in legal fees, we sell it for $60,000. Right? So the litigation is continuing. Yeah.
So you gotta really read,
That's
like
all.
I should. I think we really need to read like a HOA documents and the title report,
Yes.
and then we really need to go through everything. And even
It's also, it helps to understand the history of particular places, right? Because Laguna Beach was originally an
yes,
artist
that's
colony.
totally, you used
So
to
like
be like,
that whole area of the canyon,
Yeah.
you could see this kind of thing
Yes.
popping up all over there. And if you notice, like, if you ever look at the,
Yeah.
there's a lot of those live-in artist
Mhm.
studios that are near the college.
And there could be restrictions on those in regards to occupancy.
Yeah.
Ownership, no, but
And
occupancy,
what
yes.
is art? Well, that's a whole other thing, right?
That's a good question,
You know?
right?
Well, I'm a software developer. I build websites. You tell me it's not art, right? I'm sure it could open up all the can of worms.
Yeah, who wants to get in that position? So, but the problem that we had, our agent said, these documents are no different than this other condominium you brought in Newport Beach, and so don't worry about it. So we would have had less culpability if that statement wasn't made. And he didn't think he had to review the documents.
like I was, when I heard this, I was curious. Everybody can address, I'm an artist, I can live there. But later on, the HOA will ask you for the paycheck. If you're an artist, you're gotta pay from your artwork.
Right.
So they know, yes, you gotta be professional and you'll have a paycheck. So that would be very difficult. I thought I can,
But this is hard to prove because some of the artists, like, they sell a paint, like, $1 million, like, for 10 years.
Yeah.
Like it's like, okay, I have like income for the last 10 years, but actually I did like, 11 years ago.
Still creating, just not selling.
Yeah.
but how could you have income if you buy a property then?
Yeah,
Right?
That one painting you sold.
But actually, I don't think it specifies that actually you have to use your income from the art to buy the property.
Not necessarily.
You can live on the income from art, but the money that you use to buy it.
Yeah, I know.
See, and their argument was that most artists, their income is lower than somebody else. So the value of the property would be lower because no artist could afford to qualify for the sales price than at which the property is sold at. So that's their basis for calculating damages.
So the lesson is make sure that we
Read.
Really.
All right, so let's move on from that. So now we talked about the L6 common interest disclosures. That is all the HOA documentation. So common interest disclosures or CC&Rs can exist for homes, but there doesn't necessarily have to be a management company. So it's possible that CC&Rs exist, but if there's no management company, there may not be any fees, right? So we hear people say, oh, there's no CC&Rs. Well, that's not true. And they're a matter of public record. So it's something that still can be provided even though there is no management company. And you need to go through those documents. So things to look in the common interest disclosures, and it's very extensive and lengthy. Look through the index, look at the budget, read all the minutes, because the minutes will describe, for example, if there are discussions about impending special assessments or future increases in regards to your HOA dues. So those are all things that are critical. And then also occupancy. As many times they could, somebody may want to buy a unit for short-term rentals. Now, it's possible that the CCNRs or the HOA documents could prohibit that. Maybe you can't park a truck there. So those are all very important things. And one other thing that's important, often the parking garage is not attached to the unit. So be sure you know which unit or which parking garage is assigned to that unit. Sometimes people swap. Oh, you can use this, or I rented my garage out to somebody else. Now somebody else has possession of it. Yeah. So let's continue. Review of leased or lien items. What is typical or solar panels? And then if you see under L7, it talks about such as for solar panels or propane tanks or PACE or HERO loans. Well, most people tend to get some type of financing through the solar company, right? So there's a UCC filing that affects the property, but other individuals can actually obtain financing, and that the financing is paid on their tax bill, and it's going to show up on their tax bill. And that's very important that be disclosed. And Fannie Mae, for example, will not provide financing to a property that has an existing PACE or HERO loan. So I'm an escrow. I find out the seller has a PACE or HERO loan. I'm not going to be able to get a Fannie Mae loan unless it's paid off. Now, we had one example in which Fannie Mae, or excuse me, the lender made a mistake and they ended up buying that loan back because there was an existing PACE or HERO loan, which our client disclosed, or we disclosed, in 3 different areas. Let's see, L8, sale of buyer's property. If my offer to you, Mr. Seller, is contingent upon selling my home. Thank you. That was a good example. But then I may have to notify the seller that my offer or my qualification is contingent upon selling my existing home. So you would attach form COP, contingency for the sale of existing property. Time of possession. It's when it records, right? No sooner. You can change time of possession. And then M2, seller occupied or vacant units. So let's assume there's going to be a lease back. The seller is going to remain in the property for whatever reason. If the lease back is for 29 or fewer days, we would attach form SIP, which is a seller in possession agreement. If it's for more than 29 days, we would use a residential lease agreement after sale. And then also we would attach a form TOPA, which is tenant occupied property addendum. And it indicates, for example, that if the seller cannot get the tenant removed, if that's the agreement, then the buyer can cancel, but their only recourse against the seller would be to collect the cost of their inspection and appraisal before you could sue for specific performance, but the contract has changed. Seller delivery of documents, many disclosures, the seller is to deliver within 7 days following acceptance. What is acceptance? I sign it as the buyer. The seller signs it agreeing to my offer. It's when the seller delivers that offer back to me. That is the date of acceptance. So my buyer signed it today. It's Tuesday. Seller signed it on Wednesday, but didn't return it to me until Thursday. Thursday is the date of acceptance. Not the date of the last signature, but the date of delivery following the date of the last signature. Let's see, sign and return escrow holder provisions. So the buyer has an obligation to return the signed escrow documents within 5 days after delivery. And then the seller pays for the HOA fees or documents. They don't pay for the transfer fee. That's negotiable at least. Smoke detector, alarm, so on and so forth. Then the seller has an obligation to be in compliance within 7 days following acceptance. So let's assume they're not, and an appraiser comes out to the property. If they call out a deficiency because the smoke alarms are not installed, and the appraiser has to come back, the contract states that additional cost of that inspection is going to be a cost borne by the seller. So if you're a listing agent, make sure they comply. Evidence of representative authority. So let's assume at the time when you submit an offer and it's for an entity, a corporation or LLC, after 3 days of acceptance, you have an obligation to provide evidence that whoever signed that purchase contract has the authority to act on behalf of that entity.
Do you guys do much of this?
A lot.
Really?
Yeah. Family trust, for example. And then people don't want to provide a copy of their trust. So there's an alternative, a certification of trust. So that's an option that that everybody can rely on.
But do you do a lot of buying and selling of business opportunities and?
Not business opportunities, but businesses, LLCs primarily that are buying or selling real estate.
But, okay.
Yeah.
But this could all be used for even a business that's leasing. a property,
Absolutely, right. You need to be sure that whoever is signing has the authority to act and may have that entity, otherwise you may not have a valid contract. And then P1, all these things are theoretically included for the most part. Most of them are considered to be fixtures, but if you're ever unsure, check the box, washer, dryer. So the argument is, oh, well, the washer and dryer, it's said on the MLS that the washer and dryer were included. Well, it doesn't matter. It's only included as if it's included in the contract. So if you have questions, or you're concerned about a seller removing a fixture, a lighting fixture, just put it in here. And if you don't want things under section P2, you want this piece of shit cabinet removed, well, put it in here. You want it removed.
And if you forgot to put it in a beginning, can you add it later on?
I'm sorry, what was that now?
I said, if you forgot to add a fixture, for instance, in a beginning, can you add it later on?
Well, I think, well, they'd have to agree to it.
Okay.
If the argument is that because they're under section, I don't know if it's 8, it's pretty broad in regards to what is included. Window treatments, for example, people take their drapes. Well, they can't take their drapes, not unless buyer and seller have agreed that the seller can take their drapes, right?
Mm-hmm.
People take the strangest things. They'll never use them again. So, but yeah, further in the contract, it elaborates even further, and it usually covers everything, but people just don't recognize it.
So if verbally they tell you they won't, do you still need to record it?
If they verbally told you that they removed it?
No, they won't. They won't.
They won't?
They wouldn't remove that like a fixture.
Okay.
And it's not as a part of the exclusion.
Well, if it's a fixture, then the buyer has the defensible position that the seller is not entitled to remove it. If it's something that's questionable, then there can be things that are bolted that may not be considered a fixture, so it can be a fine line. That's why clarity is probably the best thing to do if you ever have a question.
Thank you.
Okay. NHD reports, it's common or customary. This is, Richard, you're talking about this, wondering who pays for what? It is customary that the seller will pay for the natural hazard zone disclosure. And check the box for environmental. And you should look at that also because it's going to tell you if you're in a zone where it's a high fire zone. If it's a high fire zone, it's likely that homeowner's insurance is going to be greater. Is it in an ordinance zone, a nuisance area, maybe under airport traffic? It's going to tell you that. And then Sunny, something you mentioned before, Q2 pest control report. I use the term pest control report because the contract uses pest control report. You can state termite report. I think it's self-explanatory, but it's customary that the seller pay for that. Now, we may get a pest control report and there could be deficiencies. So section 1 repairs. If you're getting a loan, the lender is going to require that you complete those repairs. Section 2 is not necessarily anything a lender will require to be completed. It could be leading to infestation, for example. Smoke alarm, carbon monoxide detector. So the seller has an obligation to give a certification that the house is in compliance with those items. It doesn't mean that they're the ones that have to pay for it, but it's customary that the seller will pay for that. Q5, government required point of sale inspections reports. Depending upon the property, you may or may not want to check these boxes or just say buyer paid. So the biggest issue that we have tends to be with water conservation and plumbing fixtures, because if a home is built before 1994 and not remodeled, it is likely that plumbing fixtures, toilets, for example, faucets, don't meet current standard flow rates. So if you allow this to say, as a listing agent, that the seller is to pay for the report, and more importantly, Q6, the seller is to pay for the corrective or remedial action, the seller might be replacing all the faucets in the house and the toilets. As the buyer's agent, hey, wonderful. If you have a buyer that's going to be completely remodeling the house and you put them on notice of what this means, maybe they don't care. So keep that in mind.
My question is, we don't want to be like too aggressive, that seller, put on
Yes.
seller, if I'm presenting the buyer. So if I leave like a blank, like what gonna happen if that something came up?
Then it's up to debates. So that the burden of the cost is not on anybody, so you probably just move along. It's a good question. I would do that many times, just leave it blank and then nobody pays for anything, or you could just say the buyers to pay.
Yeah, because the thing is, normally it's the really old house, they have that problem.
Yes.
If you are purchasing a house, like pretty new one, I just don't want to put on seller, even I'm presenting buyer, because they feel like it's really too aggressive. Or
I would
something.
agree. My approach would be
For which one? Sorry.
for Q5 and Q6.
Yeah.
I typically would say buyer and buyer, but here's the exception. In the city of Laguna Beach, there's a real property report required, and it's customary that the seller pay for it, because that's $600. And then in the city of Newport Beach, you have an option. There is a city inspection required for the sale of every property. However, you can just pay a fee and have it waived. It's just a money grab. That's all it is.
Okay.
So depending upon, but I would agree, typically, I'm going to just leave it blank or have the buyer pay, or if it is just a buyer's market and the seller is desperate,
That would be, yeah.
yeah, you might take that a different
And
approach.
also, I think like the house, if it's newer, it won't have.
It's
that
likely
problem.
it's not gonna have problems, yeah. So before 1994 and before, you could have those issues.
So sorry, what happens when you leave it blank? When they accept the offer, they fill it in, what they.
Nobody
want,
is
or-
assigned the cost, so it's just, well, I want you to pay, yeah. It
and
just
for
remains.
escrow?
Usually it just dies.
Yeah,
No one does anything.
what does that mean? It just ends up coming out
Well,
of.
you
escrow
didn't
and
agree to
sell it?
pay. No, nothing comes out of escrow. So it becomes the buyer's problem, if you want to say it
Okay.
that way.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, they accepted the property and it's as is condition percent.
I just
Oh.
leave it blank. We'll discuss that later.
Yeah,
Especially
But
house.
in the case of that, that extra fee from the city, it would just fall to the buyer in that case? Or
it most likely, well, that's a good question. Who's going to pay for that report? It becomes a discussion then for the city of Newport Beach or Laguna Beach. So, yeah,
So
you
they have
just-
to chase, they have to chase someone, and that's outside of escrow or something?
no, it has to be addressed during escrow because that report has to be obtained. Unfortunately, the inspection has to be done in Newport or the waiver. You gonna say something?
Yes, 10A, 10B. It was marked for seller. I went outside, I tried to change it. Why?
Just because she pointed out a good aspect to me that it's likely we're not gonna ask the seller to pay for those things. Because it's a better, your offer looks stronger.
Stronger,
If it's a home that's newer than 1994,
yeah.
most likely it meets today's flow rates for plumbing fixtures. It's probably nothing to be concerned about. 1994 before that. If it wasn't remodeled, most likely it will not meet today's standards. And you want to get into that with seller, expecting the seller to replace all the plumbing fixtures, toilets, so on and so forth. You may
It's
not get,
costly, right? It's not costly anyhow.
sure it is. If you have to do
Sure.
that throughout the
It's
entire
not a big
house,
number because you.
thousands of dollars, I would say.
Yeah.
Are you putting on the buyer's shoulder?
Well, the point is you let the buyer know. Here's the discussion, right? If you buy this house and we know nothing's been remodeled, it doesn't meet today's flow rates. But the buyer doesn't have an obligation to change it.
And I was gonna say, not to sound like a jerk, but I'd love to have flow rates of the 1970s.
I should get a shower, yeah.
Right?
But you said earlier that we leave them blank, right?
You could just leave it blank, right?
Discuss them, see if it's a
So
thing that you're
what-
parking, right?
I think this part is all depends on the market. If it's a seller's market,
Market and buyers
like,
attraction to that house, to the property they want to buy.
Yeah, but if it's a seller's market and they want that house, they typically don't think that's an issue if the plumbing fixtures are working. That's usually what we see. Yeah. Yeah, when it's a seller's market, we just say, for those items, we typically say buyer, or worst case, we just leave it blank because we don't want them. We want to minimize the information that has to be in a counter offer because the seller is going to perceive our offer or us as being a pain in the ass. And if I'm a pain in the ass, they're not going to give me a counter offer. So get it in, you know what you do, actually, leave it blank, get it in escrow, get it in escrow. You can always submit a request for repairs.
In escrow?
Of course you can.
You can?
That's the goal here.
Why is it you can't go? It's gonna, you're not gonna change this, it's gonna cost
It doesn't,
money.
it means nothing. Once you have it in escrow, the seller can cancel and you can make a request for repairs. So the seller can ignore you. But once that property's off the market for a period of time, sellers get nervous.
So psychology, what, next to the cash, you ask that.
That's a
return.
really good idea.
Next to the deliver the money,
let's go to
probably the
escrow.
seller's gonna accept it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Right.
make it easy for the seller to accept. It doesn't
Yeah.
prevent, remember, if a seller says, even if they're writing the contract, we are doing no repairs, it's meaningless. It does not stop you from asking for repairs or a credit.
Yeah, Richard, can I go back to 5E? I had a question on seller credit, if any.
Sure.
Is that all the time has to be numbered there or no?
Yes, it's not percentage based. A percent is just a function of the number. You said 5 or E5, right?
Yeah, G1.
There it is, got it. Yeah, the percent.
50,000, for example, on this paper, on this,
Yeah, no matter what the purchase price is,
yeah,
it's gonna remain 50,000.
so I write 50 all the time.
But you know, no. I'm not saying you put 50,000 in there. I was just using an egregious
So
example.
what is the number you have to put there?
You don't have to put anything.
You ask your,
So you wanna save your,
you ask your buyer.
If you want, if that's part of your negotiation, why do we see that more prominently displayed today? Because interest rates have been so high, often the buyer will use that money to buy down the interest rate. So if rates may be 7.5% today, but for year one, I can buy it down to 5.5%. Year two, 6.5%, but then year three it becomes fully indexed rate of 7.5%. So you can buy the rate down to make it more affordable for the buyer that way.
And so it's the same thing, it depends on the market. Right now, it's like, it's a buyer's market. You can ask a seller to give you credit, but how much you wanna do it, you can discuss with your buyer.
but here it says closing costs. Apply to the closing cost.
You
Why
can-
it doesn't explain or buy the rate down?
Well, buying the
should have
rate down is the
explained it.
closing cost.
Is that part of closing?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I have to admit, I'm really fuzzy on all that, so.
No, ask.
So you're saying in a buyer's market, it's a scenario where the seller could make it more appealing
Yes.
by, or you as the buyer agent, you're saying, I mean, is this something that would typically be added with a counteroffer or something, or is this something where?
Sometimes actually so two scenarios, we see the request up front under section G1 5E. Or when you're requesting or negotiating a request for repairs, sometimes people just ask for a credit, which can be used against closing
And what
costs.
are some of the other reasons for credit buying it down, you're saying?
So let's assume rates today are 7.5%,
Uh-huh.
right? The buy down, I'm gonna have to pay the lender money to get a lower introductory interest rate, other than 7.5%.
Like points that you're paying on the loan.
That's exactly what's going to, you're gonna pay discount points to get a rate of 5.5%. So what is the buy down cost going to be? It's going to be my savings versus 5.5% and 7.5% for the first year. And then the savings between a rate of 6.5% and 7.5% for the second year. So usually there's a 2-1 or 3-1 buy down. So those are the typical buy downs. So you're just paying the money in advance to get a lower interest rate. You're not really saving any money because it's still the same cost. But today, my payment is lower because I anticipate earning more money in the future.
So it's an opportunity for you to play with the actual price that you're paying on the property.
Well, the net that you're paying.
The net, so
What
that
it's-
you don't have to pay the points to the.
So I don't have to come out of pocket.
Okay.
I get them to pay for my closing costs. I'm not coming out of pocket. In a sense, I'm almost wrapping it into the cost of my financing. So a lot of people are just driven by cash. I only have $50,000 to put down. I'm gonna have to put it all down, but I know I have closing costs and I don't have the money to pay for those closing costs. So I'm gonna get the seller to pay for those, right? And realistically, maybe so you have a choice. You can say, I want you to pay $50,000 of closing costs, or I want you to reduce my purchase price by $50,000. What's more important to you, Mr. Buyer? Are you cash poor? If you're cash poor, then you probably should ask for a credit coming back to cover your costs because you don't have the money to close this transaction. If you have the money, just ask for a price reduction. So it's a choice.
Yeah, and also I think from the seller's perspective, because if you still keep the original price, like here 1 million, everything is calculated based on $1 million, like your commission and everything. But actually, you are giving this 50,000 credit to the buyer, but still everything is calculated based on 1 million. So
Right.
you are paying actually more commission.
You could be paying more commission, right?
Yeah,
Your
so-
expenses could be higher. Transfer taxes,
Yes.
for example, will be higher.
Exactly.
But, if you have an offer that you think is good, I don't think most sellers look at it from that perspective, that they're paying a little more in commissions. It's just, what are they netting? But it does all come into play. So where we see this even more often is on a VA loan. And sometimes veterans they'll offer more than the purchase price. So they can then have the seller pay for those costs because they don't have any money to complete the transaction. So in a sense, you're financing all of your closing costs in the purchase price.
Play so many different ways.
Yes. Yeah. So it depends on what the buyer's needs are.
50,000 is 5% of the, that's why it shows 50,000.
Yeah, I just,
Because the purchase price is 10 million, 1 million.
correct.
If it's 2 million, you put 100,000, for example.
Yeah. Remember, this would be egregious in regards to asking for $50,000. I just put it there so everybody sees it. I see
So
10.
it doesn't matter seller time or buyer's time. It doesn't matter. You ask this if your buyer is weak on one part.
Yeah, or maybe they just don't want to come out of pocket. That's,
Protect on.
they want to maintain as much cash as possible, so they get the seller in a sense to cover some of their costs.
You also explain as a buyer agent to the buyer sales agent, listing agent, and tell your seller that, hey, we want this because for any reason the rate goes down or higher, we don't want to cancel the sales, so we want the sales go through, ask your listing.
I think
owner
most
or
listing
landlord.
agents now understand that the buyers want to buy the interest rate down to a lower rate today. And even though it's temporary, it's lower for the first year or two.
You brought up something really interesting though. So is it legit okay for someone who doesn't, first time buyer, conventional loan to make a higher offer and to try to cover their closing costs
Absolutely.
this way? It's totally,
It is.
totally fine.
The only issue becomes the appraisal.
Right, they'd have to pay the.
So
gap.
this listing agent has to weigh that, saying, okay, you're really bumping this up.
Yeah.
And it's not going to appraise.
So
So,
in certain transactions. it
Yes.
might be totally
yeah,
fine.
it's $10,000 or $20,000, you're likely to make it work. Absolutely, especially first time buyers, they're usually cash poor. They just want to get into the property. So how do they do
And they
that?
always plan on the deposit or the down payment. They don't plan on the closing costs.
Right. Exactly, and it's extensive.
Yeah.
It is. They have to come in with that money, unfortunately. And then let's see, section Q7 escrow fees, it's customary to check the box for each to pay their own fees. And why would you do that? Because let's assume your client gets a discount. If you were to say both, then that discount is shared by both parties. Okay, so each to pay their own fees. It's very simple under Q5, 7 escrow fee. And then owner's title insurance policy. It is customary that the seller pay for the owner's title insurance policy. And I always suggest putting in your service providers because they're the ones who are going to take care of you. And not only that, if we use the service providers, we know I have a lot more leverage and that means a lot in transactions. And choose your team of people to work with.
Yeah, so
Yeah, just like she said about Mary.
yeah, she's so amazing. What I want to tell you is because before you were thinking like, oh, we're a buyer, the listing agent pick the escrow and the title, right? But for my experience, no matter what on your offer, you should put, our office and lawyer title too. Because maybe, they have no idea, or if they want to use their own, they're gonna like counter your back, like, oh, this is the company I want to use. They counter your back, But better you just address that. Maybe later on they don't have anything, so they can use us.
Yeah. And is this the one that's customary in the South versus Northern California?
Yes, it is.
So Northern California, it's custom.
There aren't traditional escrow instructions in Northern California. They just send you the purchase contract with a few amendments. It's very odd.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's really odd.
I heard about that, I just couldn't forget. I
Yeah.
can't remember what was Northern California specific, and I was like, yeah, I'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's strange. And then county transfer taxes and fees, it is customary that the seller pay for that. And it's $1.10 per thousand in Orange County. So in this case, it's $1,100 in LA City. For a property over $5 million, I think it's $4.50 per thousand. It's crazy. Then over 10 million, it's even more. I think at $10 million, it's a $500,000 hit to the seller.
Where
To
is
pay
this?
LA City to pay for the homeless.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's
It's
huge.
So it's just really crazy. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really unfair.
So city transfer tax and fees, it's rare we have anything. If you're unsure, say seller and then type in the cell if applicable. Right? If you're unsure, just type in if applicable. At least it lets the listing agent know you're giving it consideration and you're not just a bonehead. You're saying seller pay for something that doesn't exist. HOA fee for preparing disclosures. You can see it defaults to seller paid, and why? Because that's Civil Code 4525 in California that mandates that the seller pay for the HOA disclosures. HOA certification fee, that's typically required by the lender. It will, for example, disclose any known violations and or litigation. So even if the buyer's not getting a loan, they should always get a certification. Then HOA transfer fees, either party can pay, however, customarily, seller will pay. All right, so check the box for seller. And then private transfer fees in Orange County, the only one I'm aware of is Ladera Ranch, and you can see that it defaults to seller. And then Q16 and 17, if there's other fees or costs that you want either party to pay, you can put that in there. Here's one thing I suggest you never do. It's rare that a buyer does not get a home inspection report. So if I see people write in the physical inspection or the home inspection report and say buyer to pay. Well, why would you even write that in there if your buyer can perform any number of inspections they want? And not only that, but any report that you request in here, the seller may ask for it. Excuse me, the lender may ask for it. So we don't want the lender looking at a physical inspection report because maybe there's a lot of work to be done on the property. So if it's in the contract, they're entitled to ask for it as a lender. A warranty plan chosen by buyer. We're almost done, guys.
Sorry, really quick.
No, go ahead.
Q16 and 17, what is it, something that we should say, like do we just leave it blank? Or?
Yeah, you just leave it blank unless there's something of interest to your client or that's not shown in here. And then the home warranty plan chosen by buyer. All right, so if I'm a listing agent, I want the buyer to choose the home warranty plan because I don't want to be responsible for it. So just even check the box for buyer; they don't care. That's my opinion. And then you would type in a dollar amount, right, in terms of what the cost of that home warranty plan is. If for some reason the buyer is not getting a home warranty plan, which we always want them to have, you should check the box. The buyer waives a home warranty plan.
Can I say something real quick? I
Yes.
just share my experience with everybody because I had that problem. When you because if they're great to seller buy the home warranty, right? So you better order as a new agent, better order the home warranty by yourself because we have some lady, her name is Rosie. So she is American first American home warranty. You contact her so she can order. Because for example, sometimes I put numbers that don't exist, like 700, right? But if you ask for escrow, buy it for you, they might buy something like $200. There's nothing covered. Because you want to really like your buyer. Yeah, because last time that happened, and I feel like, pretty much like my buyer didn't get anything because that's such a big deal. We always telling them the appliances cover warranty for the first year. Yeah. So you always buy because if you're 700, you're gonna go up to 680 or something, But if that, my situation is I almost closed the deal. So normally we order it when the deal closed, and I was like, the next day gonna close. How come I gonna change for the package because the escrow order like 200 or something, and that day I remember it's Friday.
Yeah, then there's the benefit of what the seller's paying for.
Yeah, I don't know why the escrow do that, and it's on the contract $700. So better you order it by yourself. Don't let escrow order it.
But the home warranty is paid by seller, here says,
Well, that's what we're asking
for first
for.
year.
Yes, and it's customary that the seller will pay for
So
it.
why we mortgage buyer waive, why any idiot buyer can be idiot that not having home warranty to waive their.
Because they want their offer to be more aggressive, or they don't care.
Price wise,
Yeah, because it nets the seller more money, or the buyer's gonna remodel the property and they just
I
don't care.
wanna tell you, like 2021, because the market is totally seller's market, so I pay for the home warranty. Cause I don't ask the seller to buy the home warranty, because make our offers more stronger. And I promise my buyer, don't worry about it, I pay the home, I buy the home warranty for you as a gift. So my buyer is really happy right now.
Yeah, make
But
sure you offer,
only for 1 year.
Yeah, home
Yes,
warranty.
So that's like more for like the seller's market that you would do that. right?
yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
So cause,
Really quick, who did you say was for First American Home, the name?
Rosie, I send you the email. So yeah, if you want to order it, and she's really, really good.
Rosie Pool, but she'll send
Really
it to
So
you.
anywhere we are starting from 300 up, right? Up to $600.
There's no such thing as $300, right?
You
For condo.
For a home warranty, they're all
I think
$500 to
that's,
$700 now, probably.
I think half is
Okay, just basic homeowner question here then. Do you guys carry a warranty after you later on?
No.
No, just.
No,
just
I've
before
had-
you buy it? Okay.
Yeah.
Because they-
At that point now where they're like, now they're sending me,
Yes.
it's like, go extend your home warranty.
Do you know why? Because they charge you like a copay, like $85 every time they go there. And if something like serious, you're gonna pay like a lot. So it's a lot of things very serious. They're not covered.
Yeah.
And also they charge you labor, so if like, something is broken, it's like, okay, that's $500, but actually charge you like $500 labor fee, which is not covered by home insurance.
Right.
So the house, the pricey homes, it's like, pricey homes either in Orange County or LA is very recommended to have home warranty or no?
It is. We
We're
want
talking
that.
about $8, $10, $20 million home. I'm talking.
Well, it's harder to find a policy for a home that's costly. Not everybody will provide a home warranty for that type of, that
They
purchase
have home
price.
warranty for any price, right?
Yes. But not all home warranty plans or companies that we tend to use, they're not interested in a home that's $10 million usually. That's what I've discovered.
Basically, there is a limit for the coverage. Usually it's like $1,000 or $1,500 like per event or something. It's not like they'll cover you like, medium.
And there's many exclusions
Yeah.
under the plan, so it does certain things. It can help, right? But it seems like our professional liability carrier always suggests, and you can see this is why all these things take place in these contracts because of litigation. So that's why before the buyer waiving box never used to be in the contract until June of 2022. So it's all due to litigation, so it seems.
Shall we read all this for buyers? Explain everything to them? Or
Well, I'm going to tell you what the attorney from our professional liability carrier said. Go through every single paragraph.
for them or for ourselves?
You should review that with your client.
Really?
Yes.
Every.
That's what they told us,
Yeah.
because I said, what specifically? Because the HOA documents can be a couple hundred pages. Well, what do you do?
For this much HOA.
Well, realistically, for me, the HOA documents, I look at the index and there are certain things that are important to me. Some things are just boilerplate, but occupancy, I want to look at the financial statements to see what the percentage of funding is, because we talked about condos that are non-warrantable simply because the HOA, the reserves are only funded at 15% of the actual cost where they should have been. The minutes, that's very important. You're supposed to get 12 months worth of minutes. HOAs don't always have a meeting every month, but the minutes will tell you a lot. It's going to tell you if there have been discussions about special assessments or an increase in the dues, things of that nature. So that's very important to look at.
I've got an interesting thing that I'm not sure if everybody's aware of for HOA, right? I'm the vice president of my HOA. And we just had to add new verbiage to our regulations that that with latest legislature, they can't prevent you from adding solar anymore to your condo even.
So why?
So it's
Just a law.
It's state level. They want anybody to be able to get solar if they want. So like if you were in a condo where traditionally they would not allow you to put solar up on your portion of the roof, now it's allowed
Oh.
for any HOA. I mean, so all the HOAs are gonna have to be able to deal with this and, it's kind of
You mean
interesting.
you can't, right?
So I understand why you're on the board, but here's the other side. You can have discussions among those board members in which nobody else is aware of it, nor has it been publicized. So if you're selling a property in there and you're aware of it, guess who has an obligation to disclose the information that only you are aware of?
Oh, yeah,
You-
yeah. You mean if it was my property you're saying?
Yes, in
Yeah,
that HOA.
In my neighborhood,
Yeah,
yeah.
so there's the dilemma if you're on the
Oh.
board.
Oh,
He has to provide information.
luckily, there's not a whole lot of drama or like, let's just say like, yeah, there's not a whole lot of interesting
Okay.
stuff going on with our HOA.
So I see, Elisa, it says, are there specific addendums for those changes, or at a certain point, does the dollar amount require a new purchase agreement? No new purchase agreement is required. But if we're talking about the changes such as, can you give me an example?
Wherever.
You can,
Yes.
I'm looking at the chat box.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it wouldn't come up for me. No, when you were talking about it, I think you were talking about what was coming up was like an oven that was functional and then now it's not, or
I see. No.
you know, just from a minute problem to a foundation situation that is discovered in the process.
Yeah,
Does that
no,
require
there's,
an addendum? Does that?
no, you would just actually, there'd just be a written, if you want to call it, for lack of a better term, written demand, say, hey, stove isn't working, fix it.
Got it.
There's a
Okay.
crack in the slab. Okay, we're not going forward until we correct this. And we have
Okay.
verification that it's been done in a workmanlike manner.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay,
Thank you.
And then I'll continue under other terms. What could we put in there? Let's assume you are representing yourself in a purchase, or you are representing a family member, or it's an entity in which you have a 0.5% interest. If you have any relationship to anyone in any way whatsoever, you need to disclose that. And this is a perfect place to do it.
With anything that is like related or.
Yeah, if it's somebody who's related to you, you need to disclose it. If it's your girlfriend, you don't have to tell anyone. But if it's your wife or a cousin, you should disclose the fact that you, or you have an interest in this
Or
entity.
friend, how about friend?
No, I wouldn't say that would require disclosure, no.
Because the seller's basically needs to know.
Yeah,
what
right.
related to that.
And more importantly, if you as a licensee are, have an interest in buying this property, you're the expert, you should, and the seller's at a disadvantage, so it puts them on notice, right?
And Richard, today's market, not market, today's regulation has dual agency. And you have a buyer, you have a seller, you have both. I heard that one of them gonna complain, who you wanna take the side, who you wanna fight with, at the price wise, what do you do, it's not illegal, but I know they said it's better to pass it to one of your co-worker as their name as a buyer agent or.
Well, even if it's
Smart way to do
you as an individual or under the same broker's license, it's still dual agency. So keep that in mind. It is very difficult when you're representing both parties. So you have to be very careful about what you're disclosing.
So it's better you use one of your co-worker at the office.
Well, I would say that might prevent some issues, right? Because I'm not saying give up your opportunity to represent both buyer and seller, but certainly that's something that we should discuss in regards to questions that come up or disclosure issues. So if a seller tells you something and they don't want you to notify the buyer, you can't do it.
Well,
Creates issues. So you can, that's the problem, right? You can see why there's litigation over dual agency. So every case is unique. So we would just have a discussion about
Or
it.
for example, the seller said, "Hey, I want to sell it as soon as possible. Please sell it because I have to move out." And you cannot.
You shouldn't be telling anybody
You
that,
cannot
right?
tell to
Because
the
it's
buyer,
to the
no?
seller's disadvantage,
Exactly.
right? You can't tell the buyer what the seller's willing to accept.
So if the situation comes to where, or you, or me, or them.
It makes it
What do you
easier,
have
but
to do? Separate it? I mean, put a different agent.
yeah,
Give them a
it
little bit
simplifies it. It's
whatever.
still dual agency, but it's not as precarious.
Okay.
All right, we're going to skip through a lot of these things because I did already address it, but I just want to go over the definitions and we'll wrap it up. Go through this at a separate time because everybody can only take so much right now. So definitions, almost there, right?
What page?
We're in section 25. So I didn't go through contingencies, things of that nature. We'll talk about it at a different time. Thank you. Acceptance, it's delivery. So the offer signed today by the buyer, seller signs tomorrow, which is Wednesday. The seller returns the contract on Thursday. When it's returned to the buyer, that's the date of acceptance. Or likewise, after there are counteroffers, after the less person signs, when it's delivered back to the other party, that is the date of acceptance. That means everything, because the contingency periods start at that point in time, based on the date of acceptance.
Email back to you, that date of email is accepted.
It can be, yes. Yes.
And today's is all emails, not letter or sending by mail.
Yeah, it's rare. There's exceptions, but I would say that that is rare. Agent, we know who that is. Agreement, that's a purchase contract and any addenda as is, right? So every property is sold as is. So that's when your clients, your sellers say, I'm selling this as is. Well, contract states that. It just doesn't preclude them from their obligation to disclose any known and all deficiencies in the property. And of course, the question comes up, well, I had a fire in the house 10 years ago. Should I disclose that? Well, do you think a buyer would want to know that? Disclose it. Seller doesn't want to go, excuse me, if the buyer doesn't want to go forward, then that's the way it is. It's better than being
Well,
sued
so
after the
now
fact.
if you know that there was a fire, you have to be like, now we have to disclose.
You should.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody thinks that there's the passage of time precludes the seller from disclosing. But if it's a material item and you think a buyer would want to know, tell them, just put it in writing. It'll prevent a lot of problems. Authorized agent, blah, blah, blah. Car form, we know what that is. Close of escrow, right? Just the date that the grant deed's recorded. Counting days. So let's assume we have a contract that's submitted today by the buyer and it's signed by the seller and returned today. So the buyer got the contract signed back from the seller. So today is day 0. So when we start counting days for the contingencies, tomorrow is day 1. Likewise for the close of escrow. And why is that important? You need to know the date of acceptance because escrow may not always know the date of acceptance. And they may draft escrow instructions that conflict with the actual acceptance date. So that's very important to understand that when counting days.
Except holiday and weekend, right?
No, they all count. It's just if the execution of the event. So let's assume the loan contingency is to be removed on Saturday. So if it falls on a weekend or a legal holiday, it falls to the following business day then. And also for timeframes. So remember, if you're a listing agent, you should be staying on top of the timeframes when a buyer's to remove contingencies. And you should be notifying them, or if necessary, send them a notice to perform. If you don't send a notice to perform, then the contingency lives on. So days are days, it includes all days. And then remember, the only thing that's based upon business day is the initial deposit.
What about us if we want to request for repair? If we do it during the weekend, what would happen?
Well, there's no time frame for the request for repairs, but if the contingency expires on the weekend, so help me understand the question better.
For instance, if the inspection done on Thursday, I get a report on Friday, should I request for repair on a business day, or I can request and my contingency removal would be Monday? So
yeah, you can submit the request for repairs at any time.
Anytime.
Yes, no issue there.
And if they agree to it right away, they have to send a copy back to you, right?
Yes, if they're going to agree to it, they need to sign and return the request for repairs.
And if they delay on that, then what would happen?
Well, let's assume in your example, you deliver your request for repairs on Monday and contingencies are due to be removed. Excuse me, they delivered on Saturday. Contingencies are due to be removed on Monday. Well, remember, the seller has no obligation to respond to your request for repairs, and they could have sent you a notice to perform to remove all your contingencies. And if they sent you that notice to perform on Saturday, remember they have to give you at least 2 days notice. They could cancel the contract on Tuesday if you hadn't removed your contingencies.
Yeah, but if they agree on it,
Then that's fine. Well, actually, remember, if the request for repairs is signed, if they agree to everything that your buyer asked for, then the default language in the request for repairs indicates that the investigation contingency is removed concurrently with the
I see.
seller's acceptance of the requested repairs.
I see.
So you can also, they could maybe demand that more contingencies are removed, but that is the default within the request for repairs.
Mhm. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then let's see, where was there? Liquidated damages. We'll talk about that another time. Never get through this. So liquidated damages, by the way, and arbitration are arbitrary. So when you send these documents out electronically, the parties don't have to initial these. If they don't initial arbitration or liquidated damages, theoretically, the contract is not complete and you will need a change order to address that. And excuse me, change order. Counteroffer. And a counteroffer has default language saying that if all items or all initials required by all parties aren't present in this contract, then it's excluded. Or you can, in the counteroffer, say that liquidated damages and arbitration is included. And then if we looked at 32B, entity buyers, we'll just kind of skip over that for now. But then if you're going to be, let's assume you're representing the seller and you get the purchase contract and you want to submit a counteroffer, be sure to check the box seller counteroffer. So it's attached. And then the other thing I suggest, so we're gonna have to sign there. But under section, I don't know what page this is, 22, you can see your section 5 agent signatures. This represents confirmation of agency. If you remember on page 1 of the RPA, it showed who is representing who, representing the seller or the buyer. So confirmation of agency is required by law, and you will sign in the respective spot. Okay. And then one other thing, we talked about delivery of documents. So sometimes people will say, well, I never received your cancellation of contract, or I never received this from you. Well, to overcome any objections in regards to when something was delivered, if you check the box under designated electronic delivery addresses, it presumes that anything sent to this email above, if it's sent to that email address, it's been delivered. So check those boxes. It can simplify your life. 5A, the very last, just right above 5B, for example. You see it says designated electronic delivery addresses. So that's all I have for the day.
Wow.
I have
2 hours.
one more question.
Okay.
Given like that one blurb so important, right? And some of the just kind of boilerplate decisions that it sounds like, you know, we've made here in this meeting about certain things. It looks like they have templates. So can you save like a template that's got all this stuff pre-filled out?
The purchase contract, would it pre-filled out? Not that I'm aware of.
No, I saw the template feature here. I wasn't sure if maybe.
The template feature, what my understanding of the template feature is, if you have, for example, we have templates set up for the listing side, because the listing side, the obligation of the listing agent is far greater in terms of all the disclosures. So we will.
It does look like it allows you to create one.
Purchase contract. Well, there you go. So I learned something new today.
I mean, that could help, right?
Yeah, I would just be concerned about that.
Yeah, because not every situation fits. So it almost, if you do it, maybe it's best to have like several profiles, right? Like several situational templates.
Yeah, for me, I'd rather just go through it and just address it, but you can do that. Yeah.
I would go through it. It's my nature anyway. I go through every piece, but.
Richard, you know, you're sending a document deposit and everything 3 days after. And paying everything on done deal. When you get to the name of the purchaser, if it's a trust, at the same time you want to email or give it to the listing agent, you gotta give that certificate of
certification of trust
At the
and
same time, right?
at minimum, the contract states within 3 days after acceptance. That's what the contract
After
accepts.
acceptance, you have to deliver those that no
Yes.
question comes later.
Yes. Yeah. So you don't have to deliver it with acceptance. but
No, after the
After acceptance, yes.
Rich, you know what, I kind of forgot something, but I think I wrote it down somewhere. So if the buyer is presenting an LLC on the
The RCSD.
LLC
Yeah,
or like a trust,
I've
so
done,
on the presenting
since
buyer.
May.
So the name, the purchase name will
Yeah.
be the LLC name, right?
Ah,
And
yeah,
the sign,
but I'm
the
still
signer
quite good
will
at
be
that. You don't have to
who the signer's
sell
name.
yet, but I-
Sunny Sun, comma, manager, for example, or Sunny Sun, comma,
I
trustee.
cannot do like LLC signature, that's
And
wrong,
how long
right?
have you been?
No,
The signature should be the someone who who.
correct,
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Yes, the signature can't show the name of the LLC. Otherwise, it's
Okay,
questionable.
Okay.
Ah.
Yeah.
that's like-
All right, well, thank you for attending, everybody.
That's fine. Some of that-
I learned something new, you know, even like the people agent working in the same office is considered dual agency.
You-
I didn't know that.